Hello, everyone. Good to see you today. Today we are in Acts chapter 27. Let's start with verse 1. When it was decided that we would sail for Italy, they proceeded to deliver Paul and some other prisoners to a centurion of the Augustan cohort named Julius. And embarking on an Atheraitanian ship, which was about to sail to the regions along the coast of Asia, we put out to sea accompanied by Articus, a Macedonian of Thessalonica. The next day we put in at Sidon, and Julius treated Paul with consideration and allowed him to go to his friends and receive care. For there we put out to sea and sailed under the shelter of Cyprus because the winds were contrary. When we had sailed through the sea along the coast of Cilicia and Phygilian, we landed at Myre in Lycia. There the centurion found an Alexandrian ship sailing for Italy, and he put us on board. When we had sailed slowly for a good many days, and with difficulty had arrived off Candus, since the wind did not permit us to go further, we sailed under the shelter of Crete off Salmon, and with difficulty sailing past it, we came to a place called Fair Havens, near which was the city of Lycia. When considerable time had passed, and the voyage was now dangerous, since the fast was already over. The fast he's talking about is the Jewish Day of Atonement, was already over. Paul began to admonish them and said to them, "Men, I perceive that the voyage will certainly be with damage and great loss, not only to the cargo and the ship, but also our lives." Now I want to just comment on this. Paul told the men, "I perceive." So it seems like Paul had an unction. He perceived, he had a hunch. His innermost being, he could feel it. Or God spoke to him in a still small voice. Okay, I believe that it was through the Holy Spirit that he perceived that the voyage was going to be harmful, both to the ship and to the men. But the centurion was more persuaded by the pilot and the captain of the ship than by what was being said by Paul, because the harbor was not suitable for wintering. The majority reached a decision to put out to sea from there. If somehow they could reach Phoenix, a harbor of Crete facing southwest and northwest, and spend the winter there. When a moderate south wind came up, supposing that they had attained their purpose, they weighed anchor and began sailing along Crete, close inshore. But before long, there rushed down from the land a violent wind called Equuolus, or interpreted it means a nor'easter. And when the ship was caught in it and could not face the wind, we gave way to it and let ourselves be driven along, running under the shelter of a small island called Claudia. We were scarcely able to get the ship boat under control. After they had hoisted it up at the sail, after they hoisted the sail up, they used supporting cables to undergird the ship, and fearing that they might run aground on the shallows of Cyprus, They let down the sea anchor, and in this way let themselves be driven along. The next day, we were being violently storm-tossed. They began to jettison the cargo. And on the third day, they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their own hands. Boy, that's pretty risky to throw the ship's tackle overboard. How are they going to control the ship? Since neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, and no small storm was assailing us, from then on, all hope of our being saved was gradually abandoned. So they were in a very, very difficult situation. When they had gone a long time without food, then Paul stood up in their midst and said, "Men, you ought to have followed my advice, and not to have set sail from Crete, and incurred these damage and losses. Yet now I urge you to keep up your courage, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only the ship. For this very night an angel of the God whom I belong and hope to serve stood before me, saying, 'Do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand before Caesar. And behold, God has granted you all those who are sailing with you.'" So here again, God is telling Paul, "You're going to Rome." Okay, and he's been telling him all along, "Paul, you're going to Rome." Verse 25, "Therefore keep up your courage, men, for I believe God that it will turn out exactly as I have been told. But we must run aground on a certain island." But when the 14th night came, as we were being driven about in the Adriatic Sea, about midnight, the sailors began to surmise that they were approaching some land. And they took soundings and found it to be 20 fathoms. And a little further, and they took another sounding and found it to be 15 fathoms. So it was getting shallower. Fearing that we might run aground somewhere on the rocks, they cast forth anchors from the stern and wished for daybreak. But as the sailors were trying to escape from the ship and had let down the ship's boat into the sea on the pretense of intending to lay out anchors from the bow, Paul said to the centurion and to the soldiers, "Unless these men remain in the ship, you yourselves cannot be saved." Then the soldiers cut away the ropes and the ship's boat and let it fall away. Until the day was about to dawn, Paul was encouraging them all to take some food, saying, "Today is the 14th day that you have been continually watching and going without eating, having taken nothing. Therefore, I encourage you to take some food, for this is for your preservation, to preserve them. For not a hair from your head of any of you will perish." Having said this, he took bread and gave thanks to God in the presence of all, and broke it and began to eat. All of them were encouraged, and they themselves also took food. All of us in the ship were 276 persons. So that was a pretty good sized ship, plus they had a cargo. When they had eaten enough, they began to lighten the ship by throwing out the wheat into the sea. When day came, they could not recognize the land, but they did observe a bay with a beach, and they resolved to drive the ship into it if they could. And casting off the anchors, they left them in the sea, while at the same time they were loosening the ropes of the rudders and hoisted the foresail to the wind. They were heading for the beach, but striking a reef where the two seas met, they ran the vessel aground, and the prow stuck fast in the remained immovable. But the stern began to be broken up by the force of the waves. So the back of the ship was getting broken up. The soldiers' plan was to kill the prisoners so that none of them would swim away and escape. But the centurion wanted to bring Paul safely through, kept them from their intention, and commanded that those who could swim should jump overboard first and get to land, and the rest would follow, some on planks and others on various things from the ship. And so it happened that they all were brought safely to land. And that's the end of the chapter. So there was no loss of life. Just as the angel had told Paul that there was no loss of life. Next time we'll be in chapter 28. That's the last chapter in Acts. Then we'll be moving on to Romans. Romans is an incredible book. It's amazing. I'll see you next time. God bless.